program this evening is about the importance of succession planning, essential elements of will writing, aspects of gifting, use of private family trust for estate planning, succession planning for families who have children and assets in foreign countries, succession planning for family-owned businesses. We have the experts sitting here, so these are some of the topics which they will be talking about. Before we head towards the session, I would just like to remind the members that the club subscription is due. And in case you haven't made payments, please, if we could request you to make the payments, that would be wonderful. There are a couple of options. You can either do it by check, in person, or you could also do it online. If you require, we could share details of that later at the end of the program, or perhaps even tomorrow.
Yeah.
So let's
I'll try and share the online details on screen, but it may be difficult to note down, but we can email it to everyone.
Great. Thanks for that, Raj.
And Sanjana, as a Vice President Finance, I would like to reiterate that we have a huge, you can say, demand toward paying salaries and other things of the club. So unless the subscription comes, we are in a dire strait as far as the financials are concerned. So it will be my earnest request to each one of you, if you can pay your subscription, club subscription, at the earliest, it will be very handy for us. Thank you very much, please. Thank you, Sanjay.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chandal. Thank you for your few words. I would like to introduce the company which is hosting the evening today. NK Wealth Management are one of the top 10 wealth advisors in the country and are emerging as one of the fastest growing wealth platforms in India. They have a strong team of well-qualified analysts and associates. MK Global, the parent company, was founded in 1995 with the clear aim of offering sound research-based financial advisory services to its client. So MK have etched a name for themselves as reliable partners in financial services domain. And we are happy to have them here, and we welcome members from the company who are going to be conducting the session today. We are happy to announce the name of the people who are conducting the session. We have Parag More. Parag, can we see you? Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yeah, sure.
Hi.
Hi, Parag. Welcome on behalf of the.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We would like to welcome you. Parag More is the head of sales, NK Wealth Management, and he will be taking over and introducing and telling us a little bit more about what the session is going to be about. We are also happy to welcome Bhavna Kapoor. She is Head North Wealth Management. So Bhavna, welcome on behalf of us. Bhavna has extensive...
so much and good evening to members of the club.
Okay. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Yes. Great. So as I said earlier, Bhavna has extensive experience and knowledge of her domain. The speaker this evening, the main speaker this evening is Namita Agarwal. She is head of estate and succession planning, and she is a lawyer and a company secretary by training, and she has more than 15 years of experience in succession planning. So Namita, we look forward to all the things you have to say to us. We also would like to welcome Anand Bharadwaj Sharma. He is AVP Wealth Management, and he'll be moderating the session this evening. So over to all of you, and members, please keep yourself on mute. The questions, we will have a question and answer session at the end once Namita has finished with her presentation. And we would welcome your questions. So please do ask questions. Parag, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sanjana ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Raj Sharma, and thank you to all the participants. Thank you for having us here. On behalf of Emkay Wealth Management, I welcome all of you for this informative session, estate and succession planning. Before I hand it over to Namita, I thought I'll just spend a couple of minutes in terms of extending the introduction that Sanjana ma'am has already done. So as she correctly mentioned that Emkay Global Financial Services is about 25-year-old company. In fact, we are celebrating 25th year in 2020. Whether you call it a good year or a bad year is separate, but we are actually celebrating 25th year in 2020. But in the past 25 years, what Emkay Global has created a niche for itself is on the institutional research side. We are one of the top advisors in terms of institutional research to most of the foreign institutional investors, close to about 65 to 70, not only based out of India, but also based out of Singapore, US and Europe countries. We have close to about 44 mutual fund companies in India, which I'm sure you all are aware of. Every mutual fund company and their fund management team seeks research on mid-cap and small-cap stocks from Emkay and from a couple of other competition as well. But we are one of the most sought-after research advisory guys, organization from the mid-cap and small-cap segment. We also have many individual investors which are well known in this country, so to say, like Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, Ashish Kacholia, Dolly Khanna, and so on and so forth. They also seek our research on the mid cap and small cap. So we expertise into the into the institutional research. We have close to about 38 research analysts, and all of them are either IIM graduates or chartered accountants by profession, so on and so forth. And we cover about 19 sectors. So that gives us a lot of edge in terms of understanding the nuances of the capital market of India. Having said, about 2 years back, we forayed into wealth management business, and the team that that set up the Emkay's wealth management about 2 years back. I am one of the founding member. Myself, my CEO, Mr. Bhavesh Sanghvi, my research head, Dr. Joseph Thomas, and a couple of us were with Aditya Birla Group for more than a decade. All of us spent close to about more than a decade with Aditya Birla Group on the wealth management side, and we kind of joined Emkay to set up their Emkay wealth management business. We when we were setting it up, right, we had loads of learnings in terms of what to do and what not to do. And I think one of the thing that we saw is that wealth creation is a journey. The entire wealth management is a journey. You would find some customers or some clients at different stages. So there are basically broadly 3 stages of wealth management or wealth creation journey. One is an accumulation, second is a preservation, and third is a transmission. We will, just to give you a brief definition of accumulation, someone who's really making wealth and at a particular age, at a young age, then he reaches to a particular stage wherein he has to preserve that wealth, and then comes a stage wherein we have we have to transmit that wealth to the next generation. Today we're going to talk about the third stage here called transmission. So accumulation and preservation probably we'll keep it for some other day, but today we'll talk about transmission. So what it really does when you have this journeys well defined, you kind of create a 360-degree holistic approach to customers' wealth management needs and requirements. In that that endeavor, we knew Namita Agarwal for a long period of time, and she gladly joined us, and she's been now she has set up the entire estate and succession planning. She's a
investment welfare now.
So she is a professional, qualified lawyer as well as company secretary. And she has been successfully and smoothly been setting up many family trusts for the past 2 years now, and prior to Emkay as well, and has been successfully and smoothly writing wills for our customers. So this is a brief. I can go on and take you through the entire philosophy of the wealth management that we practice, but I think that session we can do some other time. And with that note, I would like to hand it over to Namita and take us through the transmission part of the wealth management journey. Over to you, Namita. Thank you, Sanjana. Thank you, Mr. Sharma.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I hope I am audible and everybody is able to hear me.
Very well.
Yes.
So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining on this session. I will share my presentation with you and take you through this. So you will be able to view my presentation on your screen. So just give me a moment. So let us first understand, what do we really mean by estate and succession planning? What does this concept really mean? So it's a very holistic approach where we structure our wealth in a particular manner where the person himself or herself can enjoy the benefits of the wealth that they have created. Where we plan for our own old age, incapacitation, retirement, so that we can get the benefits out of this wealth and then ultimately transfer it to our legal heirs as per our own wishes, and in a manner which will avoid any kind of family disputes on inheritance. It will avoid any kind of legal costs and hassles when your children receive these assets from you. And this could include preparing a will, a private family trust, gifting of assets, restructuring your assets, and designating a guardian for your minor children. Let us understand that if a person has not created a succession plan, that is, if he has not written a will, how will his assets get transferred to his legal heirs? Or rather, who are his legal heirs in absence of any kind of a planning? So in India, it is basically our religious laws which governs all our personal matters, which includes succession. So a Hindu would be governed by a Hindu Succession Act. And to give you an example, if there is a married Hindu man, his legal heirs would be his wife, children, and mother in equal proportion. So all his assets will be inherited equally by them. Similarly, for a married woman, it is her husband and her children who will inherit the properties equally. Then coming to Muslims, we see that, there is some kind of a restriction on making a will. They cannot give away more than 1/3 of their property through a will. The remaining goes as per their personal Sharia laws, which is not codified, and it comes from Quran. And then coming to other castes like Christians, Parsis, intercaste marriages, they all are governed by Indian Succession Act, where they have different rules, but more or less there is a division between the spouse and the children, and sometimes even parents get a share. So this is how the property will get distributed in absence of any kind of a succession planning. Moving on to next slide. Let us understand that, what are the common reasons why people have not yet created a succession plan, or, the number of people creating a succession plan is very low. What I encounter most of the time, the most common myth for not having a succession plan is that we believe if we have nominated somebody in a particular asset, the nominee becomes the legal heir. But that is not correct. So for any kind of asset, whether it is your bank account, fixed deposit, LIC policies, or whether it is your house, if you have nominated somebody, the nominee will only have the right to receive that asset and, discharge the bank of its fiduciary obligation. So a banker will not go and find out, whether the person has 2 children or 3 children. The banker will pay the money to the nominee, and then it is the duty of the nominee to pass on those assets to all the legal heirs, which will be either as per the will or as per the Hindu Succession Act. And there has been several judgments, both from Supreme Court and High Court, validating this point that a nominee is only acting as a custodian for the assets and he is supposed to transfer it to the legal heirs. Another myth is many of us, we believe that if we hold a property jointly, the survivor, the second holder will automatically receive the property on demise of the first owner. For example, if there is a house property or a residential house which is owned by the husband and the wife, in that case, the share of each person is 50-50. And if the husband passes away, his 50% will actually go to all the legal heirs, which is his wife, children, and maybe mother also. So it doesn't go automatically to the spouse. And that even applies for other assets like, bank accounts or fixed deposit, which has their own rules, like, RBI rules, which says that, who owns the property and who will be the legal heir. And sometimes practically, if there is a joint bank account holding, the survivor can definitely operate that account, but he doesn't become the legal heir of that. Another common reason for not having a succession plan is our belief that these kind of inherited property disputes is something which will not happen in our family. And we primarily believe that because these issues do not crop up, during the lifetime of parents, because these property and inheritance issues are never discussed. But if the parents, they just leave their state of affairs as it is, without planning for succession, even if the relations are very cordial between the children, but if they are, left to divide the estate between themselves, there are bound to be a friction, in their relationship, which may last for a very long time, for their lifetime. So I would say that it is the duty of the parents to really put down a proper succession plan so that the children do not really fight over property disputes in future. Another reason is, just procrastination, where we keep delaying this whole process and we feel that we will do it at a later point of time. So firstly, of course, we all know that death is not related to age, and because of accidents and multiple other things, it can happen to anybody at any point of time. So how we buy insurance policies or we make investments for the benefit of a family, this is equally important to put down a will or a succession plan so that if something goes wrong at any point of time, your family do not have to run helter-skelter to gather your assets. And this is something, you can keep changing it when there is a change of circumstance. Lastly, there are many people, where we see that they don't want to talk about will writing, or they feel that, this is really not that important. So they keep delaying this whole process. I would just like to add here that most of us, we start earning at a very young age of maybe 25. And till the time, we are old or we are retired, we really work hard for the benefit of our family, where we accumulate this wealth for them. So this wealth that you have earned with your hard work is very important to you, and it will be much more important to your family members, especially if you are not there. So it becomes very important to put down everything on a piece of paper. We have just understood the basics about, like if, the Hindu Succession Act, Indian Succession Act, if there is no succession planning. So I will just like to cover on the various tools which are available for succession planning. The most primary tool that we use is preparing a will. A will is a document which puts down your wishes with respect to the distribution of your wealth. It comes into play after the lifetime of the person. Some common questions which most of us we have around writing a will. Firstly, can it be made on a simple paper? So yes, a will is a very simple document which doesn't have to be registered. It doesn't have to be on a stamp paper or a notary is not required. On a very simple paper, one can write down the will, or it could be typed. The only legal requirement is that the person who is preparing the will should sign it, and it should be signed by 2 witnesses. If it is not signed by 2 witnesses, it is not considered as a valid legal document. Now, registration of a will is not compulsory, but anybody who is, above the age of 55 or 60, we highly recommend that, they should register their will. And more importantly, because a will is a document which can be very easily challenged in the court of law by any of the legal heirs. The common grounds for challenging a will is either, they can say that it was a forged document, which means the person did not really sign the will, somebody else signed it. Another ground for challenging the will is the person was not in a sound state of mind when he prepared this will. So we come across a lot of people, who are above the age of 70 or 75, where, they start forgetting things. And in those circumstances, they are not competent to make a will, and it will not be valid in court of law. So you should be in a sound state of mind while making your will. And another ground for challenging the will is that it was the person made it under pressure or under influence by somebody. So these are some common grounds which are removed when we go for the registration of the will, because we are physically going there along with 2 witnesses, and it even requires a doctor's certificate stating that you are in a sound state of mind. So if your will is registered, these grounds for challenging, they definitely gets reduced. So these are common legal requirements of writing down your will. I'll just cover some important aspects of will writing, some important pointers which one should have. Firstly, one should consolidate all their assets. So, you should list down your bank accounts, demat account, your immovable assets with their complete address, the bank locker, company shares that you are holding. This is not necessary, but it makes much life easier for the benefit of your family, where everything is there on a piece of paper and they can get easy access to it. A lot of time we see that many assets are unclaimed. So for example, life insurance policy companies, they are making a profit because after the demise of the person, nobody is really coming forward to claim these, the benefit under these policies. Similarly, RBI had reported that some 13,000 crore of fixed deposits were lying unclaimed because the family members are not aware about, the assets that the person is holding. So here it also plays an important role for your family to get access to your assets. Then before we really put down a will and we decide that whom do we want to give these assets to, that, who will be the beneficiaries, we need to understand the laws for each class of asset, because every, class of asset also has a different rule. Like for example, if you are holding the shares of a company, like, it could be your own private business, there could be a shareholder agreement which you have entered with the other shareholders. So you should check those agreements before, putting it down under your will. Similarly, ancestral property, HUF property. In Mumbai, there is a concept of pagdi or tenancy rights. So every asset has its different law of succession, which has to be understood before we decide the beneficiary. And then you can choose that, who will be the beneficiary under your will. This could be your family member or a non-family member as well. And because you do not want to follow the Hindu Succession Act, you don't want to distribute it according to that, the law also gives you a choice to decide how you want to distribute your assets. And every family situation is different. So of course, you can exercise this particular legal this thing which has been given to you. The next is appointing an executor under your will. Executor is a person, it is his duty to collect all your assets. So, to basically write to the housing society, to your bankers, to your fund houses, collect those assets and distribute to the beneficiaries as it has been mentioned in your will. And this could be anyone. It could be your own family member. It could be your wife, your children. You could also appoint a set of people like your lawyer or a chartered accountant if you feel that they would be able to execute your estate. So depending on case to case, we could advise you that who should actually be your executor. Like if you have children who are settled abroad and if they do not come to India very often, normally we advise them that they should not be the executor under the will because they may not be here to do all the paperwork. So on a very case-to-case basis, you can decide who should be the executor. Then people who have minor children, especially the younger couple, they can choose a guardian of their choice and name that person under their will in case both the parents are not there. This gives you a chance to choose a like-minded person, somebody who shares a rapport with your child as a guardian. And if you do not do that, then it becomes a court process, where your relatives will have to make an application to the court and then court will decide that, who should be the guardian. And over here, there could be a tussle between, the family members, maybe, from the dada side or the nana side of the family where, we have joint families in India. And lastly, we should have this residuary clause under a will, which actually specifies that if you have missed out on any particular asset, if you have not mentioned any asset, or even when you make a will, you continue to acquire assets in future. So any assets which you will acquire in future, who will be the beneficiary for those assets? So this is known as your residue estate. This will avoid any kind of future modifications. Then we've already covered this, that we need to choose 2 witnesses, and this is a very compulsory requirement for a will to be legally valid. They should not be the beneficiaries under your will. So they'd have to be neutral people. Somebody who already has an existing will, it is always advisable to keep checking your will in every 3 to 5 years to see that if you require any kind of an amendment due to change in family, change in circumstances, maybe demise of a person who was a beneficiary under your existing will because of marriages, and you could then either make a new will, by destroying the older will, or you could make a codicil. This is an attachment to a will where you specify the changes that you want to make. So will as a document is something, which you can keep changing as many number of times as you want. It's a revocable document and your last will is your valid will. So if you have made your will today and tomorrow you want to change your wishes, you can do that very easily by destroying the earlier will. Then coming to international assets. So for families who have assets in different countries, like, you may have assets in India, you may have assets, say, you may have.
Can you please mute yourself?
Excuse me, please mute yourself.
Hello.
Somebody's talking on the phone. Can you mute yourselves?
हाँ, एक दूसरे फोन पे एक और कॉल चल रही है.
आप अपने को म्यूट कर लीजिए.
मैं करता हूँ तुझे अभी.
So if you have assets in different countries, like in India, plus maybe in US, Dubai, Singapore, or any other country, you could either have a single will known as a multi-jurisdiction will for the assets in all your countries, because the laws around succession, sometimes they are different and sometimes they follow the same principles. Or you could have a separate will for each and every jurisdiction. Sometimes you could also have an offshore trust, a trust in a different country to plan for its succession. And this is something where, we could advise you on a very case-to-case basis, depending upon the type of assets that you hold in each country. Then another optional thing over here is that you could video record the will making process, where you record your statements and your wishes. This serves as an evidence in case your will is challenged in future by any of the legal heirs, because it proves that you are making a will in a sound state of mind and without any kind of a pressure. So your video recording can be used in the court of law as an evidence. And lastly, once you have made your will, keep it in safe custody and let your family members and professionals know about this, so that they can know that you have already prepared a will. So moving on to the another tool for succession planning, we could make gifts during our lifetime. So any gift that we make to our blood relatives, to our spouse, to our children, it is not taxable. But the most important consideration when we are making gifts is we need to consider that recently the life expectancies have increased and people are living even up to their 90s. Whereas they may stop earning when they have reached 70 or maximum 75. So because of increased life expectancy, we need to have enough wealth for our own retirement, our old age, for our medical needs, for our travel, or for anything, so that after gifting too many assets to our children, we do not regret and we don't become dependent upon them. At the same time, we need to strike a right balance over here, because if you are 90, your children are already in their 60s. So if they have to wait too long to inherit your assets, they may not be able to enjoy it, or even for that matter, even grow your assets. So like, buying an initial house or gifting the shares of the company where they have already taken over the most of the management of the company, funding an initial project, or, giving it in the form of a loan. All these are certain things that you could look at, but obviously after considering your entire estate where you have retained maximum for yourself and for your spouse. So now I move on to the second part of my presentation, which is on private family trust, which is also a very efficient tool for succession planning. It is very popular in most of the developed countries and has gained a lot of momentum in India as well, where several HNI and ultra HNI families have already formed these kind of structures. So let me first explain you the whole concept of a private family trust and how it works. So a private family trust is a different entity which is created through a document known as a trust deed. It has three parties. There is a settlor. So settlor is the person who will transfer his assets into the trust. So he's the person who wants to prepare his succession planning. Then we have beneficiaries over here. These are the relatives of the settlor, for whose benefit he wants to really form this trust and do the succession planning. And then we have the trustees. The trustees are the people who will manage the assets which have been transferred into the private family trust. So they basically have all the signing authority and the powers to manage the trust assets. Trustees could be the own family members. So it could be the settlor or the beneficiaries as well. Or it could also be a set of professionals or a combination of them. So a trust is created through a trust deed. Once the trust has been formed, it has its own identity through the PAN number that it gets, under the Income Tax Act. It will have its own bank account and demat account. And the settlor can start transferring his assets from his bank account to the trust bank or demat account very easily by gifting assets into it. Typically, a trust can hold all the type of assets which an individual owns, whether it is investment, real estate, company shares, art, jewelry, intellectual property rights. So these assets can be very easily transferred into the trust, except for real estate, which can also be transferred, but there is a cost involved over here. So whatever is the stamp duty applicable in a particular state, that stamp duty will apply when you transfer real estate into a trust. So most of the times we really do not suggest that, one should transfer real estate into a trust. They can mention it in the will and say that the private trust will become the beneficiary of that. So when it is moving from your will into the private trust, at that level, there is no stamp duty involved. So just talking about, the usefulness or the benefits of having a trust as a better tool of succession planning compared to a will. The most important benefit of a trust is asset protection or ring fencing of your assets. So typically we see that, today with large amount of wealth, most of the people, they face a risk from creditor liabilities, NCLT cases, and where, the promoters, they have personally liable to pay off the company debts. Similarly, there is also a need to protect your assets from disputes within the family or matrimonial disputes. So anything that we transfer into a trust, it doesn't belong to any particular individual after that. We are demarcating the ownership of the asset. So the legal ownership is with the trust, whereas the beneficial ownership is with multiple family members who are mentioned as beneficiaries under the trust. So if there is a claim on any family member, his assets, the assets under the trust will not get attached over here. So this is one main reason why, people are forming trusts to protect their assets for future generations. Another benefit is planning for inheritance taxes. Inheritance taxes means tax on the death of the person. So after the demise of the person, before his estate is passed on to his legal heirs, the government will tax his estate and then the remaining will go to the legal heirs. This is not there in India. It was there till 1985, but after 1985, it was abolished. But it is there in most of the developed countries like US, UK, Germany. Most of the developed countries have inheritance taxes or estate duties. So if you have any children who are living in such countries where there is an inheritance tax, transferring assets to them through a trust route will help them in mitigating the effects of these taxes for them for future generations. And you can plan for multi-generation succession. So in the previous diagram, we saw that, at the first level, the person and his spouse are the beneficiary. Then the children and then grandchildren will come into place. So, and here we can even put different kind of conditions. For example, if you say that my son and my daughter-in-law will be the beneficiary under the trust, you can put in conditions that daughter-in-law will remain a beneficiary only until the time she is married to your son. So all these kind of, conditions and all that can be mentioned into a trust, which we cannot do under a will. Another benefit of a trust is it avoids the process of probate. So I'll explain you what a probate means. This comes into play when there is a will. If a person has prepared a will, the will becomes a public document after the demise of the person. And in some cities like Mumbai, Calcutta, and Chennai, it is compulsory to get a probate. A probate is basically the authentication given by the court that the will is validly made and now you can transfer assets to your legal heirs. In places like Delhi, it is not compulsory, but if somebody challenges the will, if a legal heir is not happy with the contents of the will, it becomes a public document, it can get challenged, and then it gets converted into a legal suit, which can go on, for many number of years. I would just like to cite the example of the will of Mrs. Priyamvada Bidla over here, where she had transferred a large portion of her shareholding to her chartered accountant, which was definitely disputed. And for many number of years, the assets were not transferred to anybody. So there was a freezing of assets. And we see this even, in our normal families where nobody is enjoying a particular property for a number of years if it has been in dispute. So this is something which a trust will avoid, because a trust is a private document and it doesn't go under probate. And nobody can really challenge that. No other legal head can challenge that it was not made properly. Then people who have their family businesses, like, where the second generation from the same family, they join the family business. This can also be effectively planned through the trust route, where the trust primarily will hold the shares of your company. I will just come to this part a little more in detail in the next part of the presentation. And lastly, a trust can provide for your dependent relatives or for special children. So people, who should get the benefits out of your estate, but they cannot manage the assets on their own. And the trustees, who could be your other family members or a set of professionals, will manage the assets for the benefit of your children or dependent relatives.
Are you farting?
Just one more aspect that I would like to cover on inheritance tax planning. I have taken a very specific case over here where if somebody has children in US. So over here we see that if a person is making a direct transfer, say there is an Indian parent and his child is living in US. If the parent has prepared a will saying that his assets will go to his child who is staying in US. So the child in US will get 100% of his assets. But when he passes on these assets to his children, that is to the grandchildren, 40% of the assets are lost over here in US estate taxes. And the child will only receive 60% of the assets. But on the other hand, if the Indian parent has transferred his assets into a trust in India, and then if he names that, his son and then the grandchildren will be the beneficiary, we do not see any loss of assets over here because of the inheritance taxes. Because the trust is created in India, it is holding Indian assets and it is created by an Indian person. And typically we see that, if the father has transferred 100 rupees over here, the child may not really enjoy the entire 100. He may just enjoy 20 or 30% of the assets. The remaining 70% assets will remain in the trust for the benefit of grandchild, and there is no loss happening over here at each level whenever it is transferred to the next generation. And this is something which has to be created by the Indian parent, because if he doesn't do that, and if the US child inherits the assets, then he will not be able to form this kind of a structure, because then the Indian assets, they get commingled with his assets over there. And apart from inheritance tax planning, if you have children who are living outside India, they do not come to India very often, maybe once in 2 years, 3 years. And if you leave a large estate for them over here in India, they may not be able to manage it, to do the paperwork, to give out properties on lease, sign those agreements. So all that can be very effectively managed by the trustees, who are managing those trust assets. So even apart from inheritance tax planning, it is the ease of management of the assets. And asset protection trust. So anything that you pass on to your children, if it is done through a trust route, it will avoid the destruction of your assets under any kind of divorce claims. And we have definitely seen a rise in number of divorce claims even in India, where a lot of family wealth can get eroded in these kind of disputes. Also for people, who have their own business, who are promoters of their business, they need to give personal guarantees if their company has taken loan. So it becomes important to segregate some of their personal assets from the business assets for the benefit of their family. So if something even goes wrong in the business, at least the family, you know, their basic needs are protected through the trust assets. So we have covered two main tools of succession planning. One is a will, which is a must for everybody. And then secondly is the private family trust. So when we are creating a private family trust, it's a very gradual process, you know, where you form a trust, you get its, you know, bank account, demat account, and very gradually you will start transferring your assets into the trust. You will still have assets outside it, maybe, you know, your own personal bank account, jewelry, your real estate, for which you will still need a will. So moving on to our next topic on family business succession. This means when, you know, when the family is conducting a business and the next generation of family members, they join the family business. So here we typically see three, you know, scenarios when it comes to next generation. First one is, you know, when none of the child is interested in joining the family business, where we often see that, you know, slowly the promoter will wind up the business, or he may try to find a buyer for the business or bring in professional management. So these are also some spaces where MK can, you know, help find a buyer for your business, or, you know, where you can sell off or bring in professional management. Another scenario is where all children are interested in joining the family business, or maybe 2-3 children have joined your business, where it becomes very important to demarcate the role of each and every family member so that it runs in harmony for a very long time. And lastly, where some children have joined the business, whereas others may have not joined the business. So typically we see, you know, where the daughter is married and she is not part of the family business, or if your one child has settled abroad. Here we see that, you know, the founder has created a legacy and he may want to, you know, give away a portion of the legacy even to his married daughter or to the child, you know, who has migrated outside, but in a manner where they do not have too much of controlling rights or decision-making power with respect to the business, so that they don't interfere into the day-to-day management of these businesses. This aspect is something which can be covered very well through a private trust route. So here also we see that the private trust will hold the shares of your company. And then we define that who will be the beneficiaries over here. So at the first level, it is the spouse and yourself. And here we see that son is actively managing the business, whereas the daughter is not active in the business, but she still remains as a beneficiary under the trust, maybe for, you know, some limited amount, maybe, you know, just 10% or even 20%. But she is not there on the decision. She doesn't have any decision-making power. It is only your son who is active on the business will be on the board of trustees, and he will take all decisions with respect to the business. So we are giving some legacy as a part, you know, the founder's legacy even to the daughter, but in a manner where she really doesn't interfere with the management of the company. At times we may need to even restructure our company. Like, you know, maybe there are holding subsidiary structures, you know, there are too many cross holdings. We may need to reduce those cross holdings, sometimes merge two companies or do a demerger. So these are also important aspects when we are planning for our succession, to firstly restructure our companies and then move it into a private trust. So you may have, you know, 2 children who would like to, you know, work separately, where you can demerge your company into 2 parts. Lastly, preparing a family charter or a family constitution, which is like a rule book for your family business as to how the second generation or third generation will conduct its activities with respect to family business. A family constitution will typically, cover things like, what is the vision of the family business? What is the role and responsibility of each and every family member towards their family business? It can also define rules, whether, who can join the business, what are the education requirements for each member before they really participate in the business. Can your son-in-law or daughter-in-law join? If somebody wants to exit, how can somebody, receive his or share? There could be limited liquidity in the business. So how will they receive their share from the business? So these are some common points with respect to decision making, planning for the retirement of the founder, which is laid down in your under your family constitution, which is prepared with the participation of all the adult family members. So if there is a disagreement between them in future, they can always look at this document and decide what will be the next course of action. So why do we really need a family constitution? Because when we see at the founder level, he is the person who is taking all the decisions solely. So he can take any kind of decision. But when children join in, of course, they will have differences of opinion, which is a very good thing to bring in new insights with respect to your family business. But it's important to lay down certain rules going forward with respect to their conduct, which is all put down together under a family constitution. So many large families, like, they have already laid down these kind of structures, which has avoided future disputes. And we see that, their third generation and fourth generation have joined the businesses. So these is like, our area of service, where we firstly advise our clients after understanding their requirements. We plan that, what should be the course, whether you should do a will, trust, or something else. And then it comes to execution, where we can help them with drafting of wills, private family trusts, sometimes even charitable trust for people who want to do a large amount of philanthropy, because it has its own tax advantages. Then business restructuring, and ultimately executing the estate even after the demise of the person, where we help in getting a probate or a succession certificate and transferring the assets to the next generation. We are open for questions. Do we have any questions here?
Namita, there are a few questions that have been lined up on the chat. So,
okay.
Should we start?
Namita, if you could switch off your screen share, then we can have.
Yes.
Better. Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
I think there are a couple of questions which have been typed out. Anand, if you want to go ahead. First of all, let me thank Namita. Namita, thank you very much for telling us the difference between the will and the private and the private trust. Anand, if you want to read out the questions.
Yeah, sure, ma'am. Thanks. So thank you so much. So Namita, the first question comes from Rakesh Kaulsa. He is asking a question in terms of, give me a second.
Whilst you're reading out the question, Anand, I just wanted to also thank Namita and just inform everybody. She very rightly said that every 3 years or 5 years, you must visit or rather revisit the will that you made. I just wanted to add this, Namita, if I may, with your permission, that if you have registered your will and then you are revisiting and you are making a codicil, which is really an amendment to that will, or you're making a new one, then the second one that you make must also be registered.
Correct.
Because without that, it would be a very, it may not have the credence that you want. Very quickly, and very quickly, one more point, if I may, Namita, with your permission. You said that if you have assets in different countries, then you must make separate wills in accordance with the law of those countries so that your will is enforceable in those countries with respect to those assets. A good idea would be then to mention in your Indian will that you have made such and such will in those countries, so that there's no confusion about it. You know, just point of clarification. I didn't want to steal your thunder, but I did have one or two other points, if I may, very quickly. In regard to the trusts also, what you said, of course, all that holds true, what you're talking about in terms of inheritance tax and all of those things. But of course, one should be mindful of the fact, which most families have to contend with, that who will be the trustee? Who should they trust? Now, you know, the institutional trusteeship is not yet developed fully the way that it has overseas in the Western countries. So, you know, whilst your organization and other similar organizations, you're doing good work, I know that. But as yet, the Indian mindset does not permit that kind of a thing to happen, because questions do arise as to how much will a professional charge when you're no more? How long will that professional continue to exist, that organization? You know, all of those things do come up. And usually what happens is that you try to find somebody younger in the family who you trust to become a trustee. And that way, you know, and there's one more thing, you know, Namita, which comes to my mind. There's the rule against perpetuity in India, that you can't really tie up your assets for too long. So you will know as a lawyer that there's that section 14 of the Transfer Property Act, which says that you can only tie up your assets for the lifetime of those persons who are alive today at the time of making the trust. And there's, of course, the alternative of 80 years, etc. But we won't go into those arcane principles, as and when I'm sure that there's somebody who comes to consult with you, you will be able to advise them. You know, I'm so sorry, but I thought that I'll just quickly, you know, point out these things. Thank you very much.
Mr. Nath, thank you very much. Mr. Nath, thank you very much for bringing, saying what you've just said, because I think it's added to everybody. I mean, I'm sure those were some of the questions which people had, and you've addressed it in one go. So thank you very much for doing that. So, sorry, General Murga, you were saying something?
I have got two short questions. One, while writing the will, can we make it conditional? For example, I could say that after my demise, my house goes to my wife, and after her demise, it goes to my children. That is question one. Second, as a joint holder of my assets in the accounts, that is bank and mutual funds, after the demise, the joint holder can continue to operate those accounts.
So to answer your first question, yes, you can do that by saying that, you know, first your house will go to your wife and then it goes to your children. This is known as creating a life estate, where you very specifically mention that your wife can only enjoy your house. She will not be able to sell it, transfer it, or give it to any other person under your will. And you will mention that after her lifetime, it will pass on to your son. So this whole thing is known as creation of life estate, which you can do. Secondly, with respect to your bank accounts, if it is held jointly by somebody, of course, for all practical purposes, they can continue to operate that account, the joint holder. Though he is not a law, but he can still continue to operate the accounts.
Parents who have transferred.
Can we also make it conditional that the accounts, they remain with the wife after demise, and after her demise, they are distributed in the proportion that you mentioned in the will?
So we can create a life estate for financial assets, but for all practical purpose, it becomes very difficult to implement. Because if there are financial assets, she may just use up those assets as compared to, you know, a capital asset like a property, where we are not giving her a right to sell it or, you know, to kind of like, you know, dispose it off. So for financial assets, for practical reasons, it becomes a little difficult to create a life estate, or you could just mention that she can only enjoy the interest out of those assets without touching the capital.
And after you've written the will, the beneficiaries, that is your children, if we give a copy of the will to them and take their signatures also, is that permitted?
Yes, sir, you can do that. So after having signed by 2 witnesses who are not your beneficiaries, you can take their signatures as well.
That will avoid the conflict in the court.
Yes, that will avoid. And normally we suggest that, wherever possible, do let your children know about that, that you've prepared a will, and share your thoughts with them so that, there are no uncertainties after you are not there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Namita. Would you like to read out the questions from the chat, Anand? Mr. Dutta, can we just wait till we've done with
I have sent an email to her. Okay. I have sent an email question.
Sir, so I will just answer that question. I feel like, there is a joint ownership.
Namita, would you like to first just read out the question which Mr. Bhalla had sent to you?
Yeah. So there is a joint ownership of property between the husband and the wife. And the question was that if one person passes away, should the property be mutated to transfer the ownership of the husband to the wife? So my answer is yes. So because if one person has passed away, we need to transfer that 50% ownership to the spouse, for which a mutation is required to give the ownership to the spouse. Otherwise, everybody is a legal heir. The children would also have a claim on that property.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bhalla.
Yeah. Amita, so I'll just run through the questions quickly. The first one comes from Rakesh Kalsa. So he has asked about NRI, so people are staying, most of the children are staying abroad in US. So he is asking a question, which is, what is the expertise that we have in terms of setting up estate planning for NRIs whose assets are both in India and abroad, basically for US specifically? So that is the first question.
So when we have assets in 2 countries, with respect to a will, as I said, it could either be a single will or it could be a separate will. In US, every state has a different law, and there are certain states, who will not accept an Indian will, where we engage with a lawyer in that country to prepare a separate will for US assets, and I basically prepare a separate will for Indian assets, and we both work together to ensure that, one will doesn't revoke the other will, who will pay off the liability for, assets in different countries. So lawyers in both countries, we work simultaneously with them to execute 2 wills. Now coming to trust, any asset that you have in India, we can form an Indian trust for that, because an Indian trust cannot hold your offshore assets, because that is not permitted under your FEMA laws. So for Indian assets, we can create an Indian trust. For the offshore assets, which are situated in US, we can definitely assist you to form a trust in an offshore location with the help of US attorneys, depending from state to state, which is the right jurisdiction. So, after consulting with them, we can provide you, a full guidance over there.
Okay, the second question is more in terms of wills. The first is whether we need to register it, though you have already covered it. So this is, and part of that question again is that just in case if you have a will, do I need to register it again if I'm writing a second will?
So this was even, spoken by someone else. So
Ravi sir had actually
yes, Ravi sir had spoken about it. So it is your last will, which is a valid will, irrespective of whether it is registered or not registered. But as Ravi sir had mentioned, that if you have registered your one will, it is always advisable to register your subsequent wills. Because when your legal heirs are claiming, if one person comes up with a registered will and the second one comes up with an unregistered will, there are high chances of a dispute. So on an advisory basis, it's always better to register, though not necessarily legally.
Okay. The next question comes from Sunil Goyal, sir. He has asked, can the trustees misuse his position?
Sir, so breach of trust is actually a criminal offense. So if any trustee is misusing the position, it is considered as a fraud and he can be criminally prosecuted for the same. But
Sorry.
So if so a breach of trust, as I said, is a criminal offense and they can be prosecuted for that. And normally when we form these kind of structures, a trust structure, Ravi sir also mentioned, it's very difficult to choose that, who should be the trustee. So in most cases, we kind of try to give the powers to somebody, maybe to the set of family members or the beneficiaries who can, who may have the power to change the trustees or oversee the functions of the trust, even when we are appointing an institutional trustee. So somewhere we need to balance out on the roles and responsibilities of the trustees, beneficiaries. Sometimes we also appoint a third party known as a protector. So these are the people who oversee the functions of the trust, who see that, everything is well managed.
I mean, there are so many people involved in looking after the trust. I mean, can you give, how do you, how does the costing work out? I mean, how do you charge your clients?
So costing is, very on a very case-to-case basis. Like, for example, if I'm just doing a trust which is in India, with an Indian settler, trustee, beneficiary, it is quite simple compared to when I'm doing a trust for US beneficiaries, where there are cross-border laws which are involved. US trust laws itself are quite complex. Similarly, I had discussed about family business succession, where we do, put down the entire succession of family businesses through the trust route. And if there are listed company, your SEBI rules come into place, your FEMA rules come into place. So it's a very, a customized document where, the fees is very specific depending upon case to case. So there's no flat fees or, I really won't be able to give you, even a ballpark.
Right.
It even depends upon the complexity of each and every case.
But for a simple family.
Namita ji, may I add just a postscript to what you said? Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to business succession, that is a very complicated issue. It cannot, I don't think that it can be dealt with at this session, because many families have successfully carried out a succession of businesses, transition of businesses in various ways. You've got lots of examples which are in public domain. I would hate to mention those names. Well, I wouldn't want to mention those names, but but there are a number of examples. As for instance, you can form a family council, and the family council then decides everything. And the family council chooses one person who will then be a kind of a representative, while the company, if it's a large company, is being managed by professionals. That's just one example. So what I meant to say is that it's probably unfair of us to be subjecting, Namita to that question at this stage, or asking her as to what will it cost.
No, I just wanted to understand on behalf of the members, because that is something which some of the members have asked for.
Yes.
What is the fee structure? Basically, that's what they wanted to know. Another question.
There are many questions are listed already.
Yeah. So that was one of the questions. Anand, if you would like to read the question from Vaibhav Kumar.
Yeah, I'm just going to read that. Yeah. So Namita, this is quite an exhaustive question that Vaibhav sir has actually mentioned. So he talks about, when you transfer immovable property through a trust, what are the implications towards saleability of property as well capital gain tax, stamp duty, inheritance tax in US, etc. if the property is sold at any time by the children in US or grandchildren thereafter. So basically it is talking more about the taxability angle, and if transferred, then what are the taxes that will be involved, plus the capital gain and the stamp duties.
Okay, so when we are transferring any asset into a trust, there is no capital gain tax, because the trust is created for the benefit of your blood relatives or your family members. So any asset, whether it is your immovable property or whether it is your financial assets, there is no capital gain tax while you are transferring assets into the trust. Also, when you are distributing assets to the beneficiaries, there is no taxation on that. So on any capital transfer, there is no tax. But when you sell any house, whether it is under your individual name or under your trust name, there will be a capital gain tax, and that tax has to be paid at only one level, maybe either at the trust level or it can be paid by the beneficiary. So there is no double taxation involved over here. So if a person has transferred a house into the trust has the power to sell that house. If there is any capital gain, the trust can pay those capital gains. And then proceeds out of that can be distributed to the beneficiaries without any further tax implication. I hope
that answers Vaibhav's question. And moving on to the next question, that comes from.
But just 1 minute. 1 minute. A point that Namita, she would have mentioned, or she may have mentioned, is that when you form a trust, the trust gets taxed at the highest rate of any of its members. Mm-hmm. So you must assume that whatever is going into the trust funds, and those trust funds could be contributed either by the settler or by anybody else who might wish to do that. It is like creating a receptacle. And then into that receptacle, let's say a father has contributed something as a settler, then a mother or an uncle or whoever contributes. So whatever comes into that receptacle, into that kind of ghada, let's say, that gets taxed at the highest rate, income tax.
So there has been this recent amendment in the last budget where the trust taxation is at maximum marginal rate, which now stands 42%. So because of that, we avoid having the taxes paid by the trust. So a trust is a transparent vehicle where the taxation can either be at the settler level, trust level, or the beneficiary level. So when we form a revocable trust, the trust income is clubbed with the income of the settler and taxes are paid by the settler. Once it becomes an irrevocable trust, say after the lifetime of the settler, we do the taxation at the beneficiary level. So the trust files a zero tax return, the income is distributed to the beneficiary, and then beneficiary will club it with his income to pay the taxes. So that way we are bringing it at par with the individual rate.
But what if there is no distribution? Then it will continue.
So after this amendment, we ensure that the income, not the capital, is distributed to the beneficiary every year if the beneficiary is at a lower tax rate. And sometimes it even depends upon the type of assets that the trust is holding. Sometimes it is immovable properties or assets which is only generating capital gains tax, in which case it is at par with the individual rate.
One more point, Namita, that you mentioned was that on real estate, one would not want to transfer it to the trust because of the stamp duty issues, rightly spoken. But then if you transfer, if that goes, transmission happens by way of will, then there's no stamp duty.
Yes.
But I think we should also inform your audience that if and when there is a transfer of that immovable property to any of the beneficiaries by the trust, that will then attract a stamp duty.
So that also doesn't attract a stamp duty. And there are a very few states, so we study the Stamp Act for each and every state. So there are very few states where there is a stamp duty, but in most of the states, there is no stamp duty when we are transferring from the trust to the beneficiary.
Just check it out. I think, in some states, the 2 states have exempted it, but not the other. Anyway, whatever is the law.
In most of the states, it's not there. There are very few states, and whenever we are moving it into the trust, we check the specific, state Stamp Act.
Can we move ahead and ask the rest of the questions, because we may be running out of time and patience.
I think there are lots of questions and we'll have to try and answer all of them very rapidly.
Yes. Yeah, so Namita, next question comes from Madhavi ma'am. Can an NRI set up a family trust in India for his Indian assets and the beneficiaries who are also NRIs?
Yeah, so if the assets are in India, we can set up an Indian trust. And the beneficiaries and all could be outside.
there any restriction in transferring of funds from India to overseas when part of a trust?
So when you're transferring funds overseas, it's through the normal banking channels, through the NRO or the NRE route. And there is a repatriation limit also for every individual, which is USD $1 million. So even when you receive assets from a trust, maybe into your NRO account, you may not be able to repatriate everything at one go. So every financial year, you may just be able to repatriate $1 million US.
And are there tax implications there as well?
So there won't be any tax implication when you are, remitting capital outside India. With respect to income taxation, of course, whenever there is a distribution to the beneficiary, depending upon the law of that country, he may have to pay some differential amount if he is at a higher tax bracket compared to the Indian trust taxation.
Thank you. Next question.
Okay, the next question comes from Shalini Advani, ma'am. Can a beneficiary of the will also be an executor? And the question two is, if he or she is an NRI, will there be a problem? The third thing is essentially, what if this person is not an Indian citizen? Okay, so there are three parts to it. Can the beneficiary himself be an executor? Is there a problem if he is an NRI? And if this person is not an Indian citizen as well?
Yeah, so a beneficiary can definitely be an executor. An NRI can also become an executor of the will, and it could be a non-citizen as well. But if the person is NRI, for all practical purposes, he may not, if he is not coming to India very often, he may not be able to do the execution part, but he can still give a power of attorney to somebody in India to execute the estate if he is unable to travel himself. So that can still be done. We can still appoint an NRI. There is no bar, from appointing an NRI as an executor.
So there is another question. If the property is in the name of the wife, to whom will it pass after death of the wife?
So at the first level, I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
So if the property is in the name of the wife, to whom will it pass after her death?
So it will go to her husband and to her children in equal proportion.
Is probate compulsory in Delhi for a non-registered will, which is already attested by 2 witnesses? This is sir.
Yeah, so probate is not compulsory in Delhi. It's compulsory in Mumbai, Calcutta, and Chennai, but in other states, it's not compulsory.
Could you further deliberate on dissolution of a private trust? So what is the mechanism to dissolve a private trust? This is from Veer Khanna, sir.
So the trust can, distribute all the assets to the beneficiaries, and then ultimately it will have to, file a tax return that, it is dissolving and surrender the PAN card. And that's the mechanism of dissolving it. And even if you have a trust, and sometimes, if you're not happy with this whole structure of the way the trust has been designed, it's very easy to dissolve it by making a distribution to all the family members. Whoever are the beneficiaries mentioned in the trust deed.
Okay. The next question is from Aditya Gupta, sir. Is there a cost stamp duty for a transfer of share of a company into a trust?
So if the company is held into a demat account, it can be done through an off-market transfer. But if there are physical shares, the stamp duty is 0.25%, of that minimum value of 10 rupees or 100 rupees.
I think, so there is one question from gift it comes from Vikas, sir. We understand that gift of a estate is non-taxable. Is it the same for cash as well? Additionally, can you please also confirm if gift to below 14 years old is allowed, and what is the limit for taxation rules?
So see, a gift to a blood relative is not taxable. If you are, giving it to a minor child, of course, the income and all that will get clubbed with the income of the parents. So there is always a clubbing provision where you are gifting assets to your relatives, but there is no taxation over here. Unlike if you are gifting to a non-relative, it is considered as income from other sources for that person. And whatever he receives, he has to pay a tax on that.
Sure. The next question is from Anish Bhalas. In case of the father has already transferred the share company through a gift deed, be challenged if he is no more by the children after his demise?
When we have gifted it during the lifetime, it cannot be challenged. Because of course, he was, the grounds for challenging which comes under a will, where the person was not in a sound state of mind or any other thing, that doesn't apply to a gift unless they are able to prove that, he was, not in a sound state of mind or under undue influence, other aspects, but very difficult to challenge a gift deed as compared to a will.
Sure. There is this.
May I add something there, very quickly, which people might be interested.
There are two questions, sir.
Yeah. I'm just going to add something which I think the listener might want to know the answer to. Very quickly, I'll just take 30 seconds. Namita mentioned that during your lifetime you can make a gift. Of course, you can make a gift, and sometimes aged parents find that after making a gift to their children, they're not being maintained properly. So there's a new law on the subject, and that law is also 12, 13 years old, where the aged parents can get that property back. That's all that I wanted to say.
Yes, I'll just interject for a second.
Namita, my questions are
there. Deepakji, just one sec. A lot of people are asking for the contact details of MK. Towards the end of this session, that last slide, please put it up again at the end, because people want to note down your contact details.
Okay.
And Namita ji, my question as listed is that is it appointing executor of will is not optional?
Sir, so it is an optional thing. You may not appoint an executor, but it is always preferable, because if you do not do that, the court have to appoint, and you need to make an application to the court. So, it's a lengthy process. So it is always better to appoint an executor.
So that the beneficiary himself or herself can be an executor?
They can be the executor, but again, they will have to get themselves appointed as the executor before they can really, start discharging this function. So even if you are making an application to the bank, you need to, give them an authority that basis what authority are you executing that estate. If it is very clearly mentioned in your will, they will pay the funds to you. Otherwise, you will have to, get a letter from the court, which authorizes you to execute that estate, which will again take a lot of time.
So means execution is a must.
Yes. I mean, legally it's not a must, but always recommended, for 100% of cases.
Okay. The other thing about gift theft you are saying, but government says making payment for more than 50,000 rupees to the blood relation is taxable?
No, sir. More than 50,000 is for non-blood relatives, is taxable. But today, give as much as you want to your spouse and to your children. When that money, they don't have to pay any tax. So suppose if you transfer 1,00,000 rupees to your son, he won't have to pay a 30% tax on that. He can receive it as a gift.
So you are sure on this account?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So, last few questions and just run through. So, is there a restriction on the number of executors that you can put on a will?
So there is no restriction. You may either have a single executor. You could have 2 or 3, multiple executors who could act jointly. So depending upon, the family structure, how they are, what kind of relationship they have with each other, we decide, whether you should have 1 or multiple executors.
Okay, so is the government, what is the government fee for making a trust?
What is the government fees?
Yeah.
There is no government fees over here. So forming a trust is not, quite complex as, forming a company or a partnership. So it is just, forming a trust deed, where you just have your legal charges. After you create a trust deed, it is not compulsory to register your trust. So you could either have an unregistered trust or a registered trust deed. If it is a registered trust deed, there would be nominal registration charges. Apart from that, there is no government fees over here.
Okay. Last question from Vipon Kapoor. So, a member of HUF gift any amount to his or her own HUF? So we have not covered it, but...
Yeah. So under an HUF, every co-partner or a member, they have their own defined share, and they can only give that much share to his or own HUF, or they can demand for a partition, but not more than what is their share in the HUF.
Okay. So, sir, I think, Sanjana ma'am, I have taken up all the questions that were posted to the chat box. So, if there is any other question, maybe people can put it up, or we can then now conclude the session.
Are there any more questions, or are we through with the questions? I don't think we have any more questions. So,
you could always write to us on this email ID that I've shared on estate@mkwealth.com. And we'll be happy to address your questions.
So thank you, Namita.
Sorry, go on, Bhavna.
No, ma'am, please close this.
I was just saying we will be sharing these details by email as well. So in case people are interested, they could get in touch with you.
Our pleasure, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you, Namita, for such an informative and enlightening session. So on behalf of MK Group and MK Wealth Management, sincerely thank the Vasant Vihar Group Committee and all the club members for having joined us today in the evening. We hope that we are able to make value additions through our details on estate and succession planning. So closing the evening, this session has just come to an end and the relationship has just begun. So good evening to all of you. All the details will be there with you along with the presentation, and we are happy to do one-on-one sessions as and when somebody desires. Anand will be in close touch.
Namita, you can stop sharing the screen so that we are face to face.
Thank you.
So that brings.
So I think I must say, sorry, Sanjana, I must say that I haven't seen a more attentive audience here in Vasant Vihar. Now suddenly the attention is going away. But yes, there's been a very attentive and a full house. And I think your talk kept everybody very well engaged. And there were lots of questions. I think people have been asking for a copy of the presentation. So I'm sure that you can,
sure,
share it
we'll
with
share
us.
that. Yes.
We'll send it to the members. And in any case, of course, the whole session has been recorded. So that also we will share with the members.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Before everybody leaves, I would just like to tell you about the session which we have tomorrow evening. We have a cocktail making session, very different from what we had today. We want to have as much variety as possible. We have a very experienced and award-winning sommelier and beverage expert, Ankur Chawla, who's worked with brands like Taj and JW Marriott, who will be showing us how to make some very nice, cool cocktails. So do log in and join us at 7 p.m. tomorrow when we are back with something which I think we can relax with after a very, very intense and informative session this evening. So thank you, Namita. Thank you, MK Wealth Management.
So as Sanjana says, after spending the whole day tomorrow on, your thought process on succession planning, you might want to relax at 7 o'clock and get yourself a cocktail. So that's what we will be, telling you how to do.
Sure, sir.
Thank you.
Very much. Have a lovely
Thank you, Sanjana. Very informative. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a great
Thank you, ma'am. Take care. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.